Everyone thinks John Wesley Hardin was a gunslinger. He wasn't. He was a serial killer with antisocial personality disorder. Between 1868 and 1877, this man killed between 20 and 42 people, making him one of America's most prolific murderers. His first victim was a former slave named Mage in November 1868. Hardin was only 15 years old. He didn't shoot Mage in a fair fight. According to Freedmen's Bureau records and Hardin's own account, he shot Mage 5 times after a confrontation on a country road, and Mage died 3 days later from his wounds. That's not a gunfight, that's murder, and it was just the beginning. Now, if you grew up watching westerns or reading dime novels about the Old West, you probably heard Hardin's name alongside Billy the Kid or Jesse James. But here's the difference. Billy the Kid killed maybe 4 people. Possibly 9 if you count everything attributed to him during the Lincoln County War. Jesse James was a bank robber who was killed during robberies. John Wesley Hardin's body count ranges from 20 confirmed kills to 42 claimed kills at the time of his sentencing in 1877. Contemporary newspapers attributed 27 deaths to him. Modern historians believe the actual number is somewhere over 20. Possibly as high as 40 or more. But what matters isn't just the number, it's how he killed them. He shot men in the back. He killed people while they slept. He reportedly murdered a man for snoring too loud in a hotel room. This wasn't about surviving the frontier or defending his honor. This was pathological violence. And if Hardin were alive today, we'd be studying him alongside Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer for textbook psychopathy. John Wesley Hardin was born on May 26, 1853 in Bonham, Texas. His father, James Gibson Hardin, was a Methodist preacher and circuit rider, which meant young John grew up hearing about sin and redemption every single day. His mother, Mary Elizabeth Dixon, came from a respectable family. By all accounts, this should have been a stable religious household, but something went wrong early. Hardin later claimed his father beat him regularly, though there's no independent verification of that. What we do know is that by age 14, Hardin stabbed another boy during a fight at school. The boy, Charles Slater, survived, but it showed Hardin's willingness to escalate violence beyond what the situation required. That's a pattern you'll see throughout his life. Classic antisocial personality disorder emerging in adolescence. The Civil War shaped Hardin's worldview in ways that can't be overstated. Texas was Confederate territory, and the Hardin family supported the South. When the war ended in 1865, John was 12 years old, and suddenly Union soldiers and Reconstruction officials controlled Texas. For white Southerners who'd supported the Confederacy, this was humiliating. For someone like Hardin, who already had violent tendencies, it became justification. He could frame his violence as resistance, as defending Southern honor, when really he was just looking for excuses to kill. That first murder in 1868 is crucial to understanding everything that followed. The victim was a freedman named Mage, reportedly a former slave who had been owned by the whole Xiaozhen family. According to Hardin's autobiography, which he wrote decades later in prison, he and Ma got into a wrestling match. Hardin won, which angered Mage. The next day, Hardin claimed that Mage ambushed him on the road, coming at him with a stick and accusing him of cowardice. So, Hardin shot him 5 times. Mage fell to the ground, mortally wounded, and died 3 days later. But here's what's important. A Freedmen's Bureau agent at the time recorded a different version, saying Hardin shot Mage simply because the freedmen objected to Hardin's abuses. Either way, Hardin was 15 years old and he just committed murder. Most people would be traumatized by killing someone at that age. Hardin wasn't. Instead of turning himself in or showing remorse, he ran. His father, believing his son wouldn't get a fair trial from Union-occupied authorities, told him to hide. When Union soldiers came looking for him, Hardin killed 3 of them in separate incidents over the next few weeks. According to his own account, he claimed he ambushed them at a creek crossing because he had no mercy on men who wanted to capture and kill him. Whether this happened exactly as Hardin described is questionable. He was known for exaggerating his exploits, but what's clear is that by the end of 1868, Hardin had killed at least 4 people. He was 16 years old. By 1870, Hardin had killed several more people, and the pattern was becoming undeniable. In January of that year, he was in a town called Tawash in Hill County, Texas. He got into an argument with a man named Benjamin Bradley, reportedly during a card game. Now here's where you hit that like button if you're finding this video interesting, because we're about to dive into the specific killings that show Hardin's true nature. The details of the Bradley killing vary depending on the source. Hardin later claimed Bradley shot at him first and missed, so Hardin killed him in self-defense, but a contemporary newspaper report suggested Hardin noticed money missing after the card game and went looking for another player named Moore. Along the way, he found Bradley and shot him. Whatever the truth, Bradley died from bullets to the head and chest, and Hardin left town immediately. A few months later, in Hornhill, Texas, Hardin got into an argument with a circus worker. Again, the details are murky, but multiple witnesses said the circus worker was walking away when Hardin shot him in the back. The man died 3 days later. Hardin was never charged because he'd already left the county. Then there's the famous snoring incident in Cass, Texas. Hardin was staying at a hotel. The man in the room next to him was snoring loudly. Now, most people would bang on the wall or complain to the front desk. Hardin shot through the wall, killing the man. When asked about it later, Hardin said the snoring was keeping him awake. The victim may have been named Hoffman, though records from that time are incomplete. Hardin left town before sunrise. Years later, when confronted about this story, Hardin reportedly said, "People told lies about him, claiming they say I killed 6 or 7 men for snoring. Well, it ain't true. I only killed 1 man for snoring." Do you see the pattern? These weren't gunfights. These weren't situations where Hardin's life was in danger. He killed people for minor offenses, for perceived disrespect, or for no reason at all beyond convenience, and the fact that he kept moving, kept leaving town immediately after each killing shows he knew what he was doing was wrong. He just didn't care. This is textbook psychopathy, lack of empathy, inability to feel remorse, and treating human beings as disposable objects. In 1871, Hardin was working as a cowboy on a cattle drive from Texas to Kansas along the Chisholm Trail. This was common work for young men in Texas, and the trail drives employed hundreds of cowboys every year. But Hardin couldn't make it through a simple cattle drive without killing people. Historians believe he killed 7 people on the way north, and 3 more in Abilene, Kansas. In Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma, Hardin got into a dispute with Mexican cowboys. Some reports say 5 Mexican vaqueros were killed. Others say 6. Hardin himself claimed 6 in his autobiography and seemed proud of it. He said they tried to ambush him, but other cowboys on the drive told different stories. They said Hardin picked a fight, drew first, and shot men who were trying to back away from the confrontation. When the cattle drive reached Abilene, Kansas, Hardin met Wild Bill Hickok, who was the town marshal at the time. Now, Hickok was a real gunfighter, someone who'd actually been in genuine life or death situations. There's a famous story about Hickok confronting Hardin about carrying guns in town, and Hardin supposedly did his border roll trick, also called the road agent spin, spinning his pistols backward into the holsters to distract Hickok, then spinning them forward again. Whether that actually happened is questionable. What we know for certain is that on August 6, 1871, Hardin killed a man named Charles Cougar at a hotel in Abilene. Hardin and Cougar had been drinking together. They got into an argument in the hotel, and Hardin shot Cougar, killing him. Then Hardin climbed out a window and rode out of town. Hickok later said he would have arrested Hardin if he caught him, but Hardin was gone before Hickok even knew about the shooting. That tells you something about Hardin's tactics. He never stuck around to face consequences. He killed and ran over and over again. Back in Texas, Hardin continued his pattern. In 1872, he was playing cards at the Gates Saloon in Trinity, Texas, when he got into a gambling dispute with a man named Phil Sublette. Sublette shot Hardin with a shotgun, wounding him seriously in the side. and our 2 buckshot pellets penetrated Hardin's kidney, and for a time it looked like he might die. While recovering from these wounds, Hardin actually considered turning himself in and clearing the slate on his past crimes. He surrendered to the sheriff of Cherokee County in September 1872. But when he learned how many murder charges the sheriff planned to file against him, Hardin changed his mind. A relative smuggled him a hacksaw, and he escaped after cutting through the bars of a prison window. In DeWitt County, he killed a man named J.B. Morgan during what Hardin claimed was a fair fight. In 1873, Hardin got involved in the Sutton-Taylor feud, one of the longest and bloodiest family conflicts in Old West history. The feud had started in 1868 when William Sutton, a deputy sheriff, killed members of the Taylor family, while Hardin aligned himself with Jim Taylor in the anti-Reconstruction forces. On July 18, 1873, Hardin killed Jack Helm, a former Texas state police captain who was leading the Sutton faction. At least 35 people died in this feud before the Texas Rangers finally ended it in 1876. How many of those deaths were Hardin's doing is impossible to say, but he was definitely responsible for several. Then came the killing that finally brought serious consequences. On May 26, 1874, John Wesley Hardin turned 21 years old. He was in Comanche, Texas, visiting his parents to celebrate his birthday. That day, he'd been at horse races held about a mile and a half northeast of town. His horse Rondo won first place, and Hardin won big, reportedly taking home $3,000 in cash, 50 head of cattle, 15 horses, and a wagon. And he and his cousins went to Jack Wright's saloon on the town square to celebrate. Brown County Deputy Sheriff Charles Webb was at the races and knew Hardin was wanted, but he made no effort to detain him there. Later that afternoon, Webb came to Comanche. According to some accounts, he was there as a bounty hunter, knowing there was a price on Hardin's head. When Webb entered the saloon, Hardin asked him if he'd come to arrest him. Webb said he had not, so Hardin invited him to have a drink. What happened next depends on who you believe. Hardin claimed that as he led Webb toward the bar, Webb drew his pistol and fired first, grazing Hardin's side. One of Hardin's men yelled out a warning, and in the ensuing gunfight, Webb was shot dead. And it was reported at the time that Webb was shot as he was pulling out an arrest warrant for one of Hardin's associates. Webb died from bullets to the head and through the abdomen. But here's what made this different. Webb was a lawman, and he was well liked in the community. The town formed a lynch mob that same evening. They couldn't catch Hardin, who'd fled immediately despite being wounded, but they caught his brother Joe and 2 of his cousins, Bud and Tom Dixon. On July 4, 1874, the mob broke into the jail and hanged all 3 of them from an oak tree. For the first time, Hardin's violence had consequences for his family. You'd think that might have stopped him, but it didn't. Hardin went into hiding with his wife Jane and their children, using the alias J.H. Swain. They moved to Florida in Alabama, even in hiding. Well, Hardin reportedly killed at least one more person for certain, possibly as many as 5 or 6 more. The exact details of these killings are unclear because Hardin was using false names and moving constantly. The Texas Rangers were relentless. They tracked Hardin for 3 years, following leads across multiple states. The manhunt was led by Ranger Lieutenant John Armstrong, working under Captain Leander McNell, who'd made capturing Hardin his personal mission. Both Armstrong and McNell believed Hardin was hiding in Florida, and they were right. On August 23, 1877, Armstrong and several other Rangers tracked Hardin to a train at Pensacola Junction, Florida. Hardin was traveling with his wife Jane and their children going by the name J.H. Swain. Armstrong boarded the train and confronted Hardin in one of the cars. Hardin tried to draw his pistol, but it got caught in his suspenders. Armstrong clubbed him over the head with his own pistol, knocking him unconscious. It was over in seconds. After 9 years, dozens of murders, and a manhunt across half the country, John Wesley Hardin was finally captured. And here's the thing. When they arrested him, Hardin wasn't living as some desperate fugitive. He was traveling comfortably with his family, had money, was well-dressed. He'd been working as a logging contractor in Florida. He could have lived a normal life at any point, but he chose violence instead. Hardin was extradited to Texas and tried for the murder of Deputy Webb in Comanche. The trial took place in late September 1877. Multiple witnesses testified about the shooting. On June 5, 1878, Hardin was sentenced to serve 25 years in Huntsville prison. He was 24 years old and had killed at least 20 people, possibly twice that many. Prison did something interesting to Hardin, though it didn't make him a better person. He tried to escape several times in the early years. In 1879, he and 50 other convicts were stopped just hours before they could tunnel into the prison armory. Prison records show Hardin was cited for mutinous conduct, conspiring to incite other inmates, throwing food on the floor, laziness, gambling, and trying to get other convicts to disobey orders. Eventually, Hardin settled into a prison routine. He studied law through correspondence courses and earned a law degree. He read theological books, became the superintendent of the prison Sunday school, and tried to position himself as someone who'd been forced into violence by Reconstruction and unfair persecution. He also wrote his autobiography, which was published in 1896 after his death, and it's a masterpiece of self-justification. In his autobiography, Hardin portrays every single killing as either self-defense or justified retaliation. He never expresses genuine remorse. He never acknowledges that his victims had families, had lives, had value beyond being entries in his body count. The autobiography reads like a serial killer's trophy collection, with Hardin reliving each murder, describing his speed and accuracy, explaining why each person needed killing, as he put it. This behavior mirrors what we see in modern serial killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. The need to relive their crimes, the complete lack of empathy for victims, and the grandiose self-image where they're always the hero of their own story. Psychology wasn't advanced enough in the 1870s to diagnose someone like Hardin properly. But if we look at him through a modern lens, the signs of psychopathy are everywhere. He showed no empathy for his victims. He couldn't form genuine emotional connections. He was grandiose, believing he was special, above the law, justified in everything he did. He manipulated people constantly, using charm when it suited him and violence when it didn't. And most tellingly, he never showed genuine remorse. Everything was someone else's fault. In Hardin's mind, he was always the victim, always justified, always right. These are textbook symptoms of antisocial personality disorder. Hardin served 17 years of his sentence before being released on February 17, 1894. He was 40 years old. Later that year, on March 16th, he was officially pardoned by Texas Governor Jim Hogg. On July 21, 1894, he passed the state bar examination and obtained his license to practice law. His wife Jane had died while he was in prison, so he returned to Gonzales, Texas to live with his 3 children and try to build a law practice. But here's the thing about people with antisocial personality disorder. They don't change. He briefly practiced law in Gonzales, even tried to win political office but failed. In 1895, he moved to El Paso to establish a law practice there. Within months, he was back to his old patterns. He started drinking heavily, got into fights, threatened people who crossed him. He took up with a woman named Beulah Morose, who was the widow of another outlaw. Some accounts say she was the wife of one of his clients, a cattle thief named Martin Morose, who had fled to Mexico. In May 1895, Hardin lost money gambling at El Paso's Gem Saloon. He pulled a pistol and took back the $100 he'd lost. In July, he was fined $25 for gaming and his gun was confiscated. When Beulah Morose was arrested by El Paso police officer John Selman Jr. for carrying a pistol illegally in the city, Hardin publicly threatened the young officer and reportedly pistol-whipped him. John Selman Sr., the young officer's father, was a constable in El Paso. He was also a former outlaw and gunfighter himself, someone who'd killed numerous men over his lifetime. On the afternoon of August 19, 1895, Selman Sr. and Hardin had an angry confrontation on the street. That evening, Hardin went to the Acme Saloon and started playing dice at the bar. His last words were reportedly 4 sixes to beat. Shortly before midnight, John Selman Sr. walked into the Acme Saloon. According to the bartender, Frank Patterson, who gave testimony later, Hardin was standing at the bar with his back to the door, shaking dice with another man named Henry Brown. Selman said something as he came through the door, then shot Hardin in the back of the head with a Colt .45, killing him instantly. As Hardin lay on the floor, Selman fired 3 more shots into his body. Hardin's hand was on the handle of his holstered Smith & Wesson pistol, but he never got a chance to draw it. Selman was arrested and charged with murder. He claimed self-defense, stating that Hardin had seen him in the mirror and was reaching for his gun. A jury couldn't reach a verdict, resulting in a hung jury, and Selman was released on bond pending a retrial. At Selman's trial, witnesses reportedly testified, if Hardin was shot in the eye, it was excellent marksmanship. If he was shot in the back, it was excellent judgment. Before the retrial could happen, Selman was killed in a shootout with U.S. Marshal George Scarborough on April 6, 1896. John Wesley Hardin died on August 19, 1895. He was 42 years old. He was buried in Concordia Cemetery in El Paso, Texas. The irony wasn't lost on people at the time. John Wesley Hardin, who'd shot so many men in the back, who'd killed people without warning, who'd never given his victims a fair chance, died exactly the same way. Shot from behind, no warning, no chance to defend himself. Some people called it justice, some called it murder. But almost everyone agreed that Hardin had it coming. Here's what's remarkable about Hardin's story. He became a legend despite being a serial killer. Dime novels romanticized him. Historians wrote about him as a gunfighter rather than a murderer. Movies and TV shows portrayed him as a complicated anti-hero. And for decades, people bought into the mythology Hardin created in his autobiography. The idea that he was a product of his time, forced into violence by circumstances beyond his control. But when you actually look at the facts, when you examine his victims and how they died, the truth is clear. Hardin wasn't defending himself. He wasn't fighting for a cause. He was killing because he wanted to, because he could, because it made him feel powerful. The fact that he did it with a gun in 1870s Texas instead of with a knife in 1970s California doesn't change what he was. Like Ted Bundy, who selected victims based on appearance and opportunity, Hardin selected victims based on convenience and perceived slights. Like Jeffrey Dahmer, who kept trophies of his kills, Hardin kept detailed mental records of his murders that he later turned into his autobiography. Both modern serial killers and Hardin share the same core traits: lack of empathy, grandiose self-image, manipulation of others, and complete inability to accept responsibility for their actions. Think about this. If John Wesley Hardin were alive today, he'd be in a supermax prison or on death row. We'd be reading FBI profiles about him. There'd be documentaries analyzing his psychology, true crime podcasts dissecting his methods. And we wouldn't be calling him a gunfighter or an outlaw. We'd be calling him what he was, a serial killer who happened to operate during a time and place where it was easier to get away with it. So, why did history get this wrong for so long? Part of it is the mythology of the Old West. We want to believe in gunslingers and shootouts and men who lived by a code, even if that code was violent. It's more romantic than the truth. Part of it is Hardin's own propaganda. His autobiography shaped how people saw him for generations, and he was smart enough to frame his killings in ways that seemed almost reasonable if you didn't look too closely. And part of it is simply that in Texas, during Reconstruction, life was cheap, law enforcement was spotty, and if you kept moving, you could literally get away with murder dozens of times. But we know better now. We understand psychology. We can recognize patterns of behavior, and we can see Hardin for what he really was. Not a gunslinger, not an outlaw hero, a serial killer who spent 9 years terrorizing Texas and surrounding territories, leaving dozens of bodies in his wake, and who only stopped when Texas Rangers finally caught him. What do you think? Was John Wesley Hardin a product of his time, or has he been a killer in any era? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more videos exposing the truth behind Old West legends, subscribe to Ghosts of the Frontier. We're cutting through the mythology to show you what really happened out there on the frontier. Next week, we're looking at another outlaw whose legend doesn't match the facts. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. John Wesley Hardin died in the Acme Saloon in El Paso in 1895, shot in the back of the head by a man who didn't give him a chance to fight back. He was buried in Concordia Cemetery in El Paso, Texas, and honestly, that's probably the most appropriate ending his story could have had. Heat, heat,